So, Robert, in multi-party negotiations, where the parties are many, the issues are many and complex, one of the challenges that negotiators face is being able to keep track of who's at the table, what's being said at the table, what's been accomplished at the table, and a sense of, is the whole group making any progress today? So one of the challenges that negotiators face, from the inexperienced to the very experienced, is this problem, this challenge called negotiator fatigue. And what it refers to is the inability to stay focused for a very long period of time on a set of proposals, a set of details and issues, the inability to be able to track all the sidebar meetings happening, proposals coming on and off the table, and being able to manage what psychologists call the cognitive flooding of negotiation. Think of the air traffic controller, very busy at Logan, O'Hare, Atlanta's Hartsfield Airport, where you're trying to land many planes at once at rush hour. And the negotiator, in part, becomes overwhelmed. Too many players, too many issues. So what are the ways, given that public policy problems, for example, are becoming increasingly complex, given that we are all not machines, how can humans, as negotiators, process all of this level of detail? So the first proposal that I would like to make is that negotiators need to play the whole game. As I have mentioned elsewhere, negotiation involves setting the table, managing the process, and closing the deal. You need to be awake, alive, and participate in all phases of the negotiation. You need to be able to have purpose, discipline, and focus. And what this means, in addition to knowing your brief, it's important to pay attention to the arguments of others, to their interests, to watch for the development of new coalitions, blocking coalitions, but you can only do that if you bring incredible focus to this complex task. At the same time, and it's very hard for many of us, negotiation is very much about the details. Now, there might be proposals being discussed hours and indeed days at a time. But your task, and especially if you're part of a team of negotiators, is to read all the briefs, to gather all the intelligence that you can, and to be able to stay focused even when the issues are not of great consequence to you. If I were to say that there is one central area where even the greatest negotiators, the most experienced, are vulnerable, it's when the issues being discussed are not directly relevant to them at this moment. But these issues are all interlinked, and they will come back to hurt and undermine those players who have not taken the time and effort to figure out how these issues play into their overall concerns. At the same time, to stay engaged in this process, one can quickly become fatigued if you're continually advocating for your interests, so I suggest that players switch modes and focus more on inquiry, about asking questions, try to get additional information, have trust-building conversations, but the goal is to build momentum and to stay engaged. So inquiry becomes more important than advocacy.
So, what should I do if I feel negotiators' fatigue coming on, or if I begin to lose focus during a negotiation?
I think two things are critical here. The first, you've already mentioned this, that you are self-aware to know that you're getting tired, that you're losing focus. And in this connection, it's important to take what I like to refer to as the negotiator's pause. It means you take a break, you get up, you have a glass of water, you have some informal breaks with some colleagues, perhaps have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. At the same time, recognizing that the negotiation will have to come to an end at some point, you might signal to the chair, to the process leader, about the importance of deadlines to refocus yourself and to refocus others. Having then taken the negotiator's pause, invoked the notion of deadlines, you still may feel somewhat fatigued. And I recommend that using your allies at the table, exercising indirect influence, having others carry your message for a period of time is perfectly acceptable. But in summary, it's important to maintain purpose, discipline, and focus, to be able to stay engaged across the whole negotiation, and to be very clear in your mind that should you and your team not pay attention to the smallest details, we know, we have too much history of this, that these small details can come back to hurt us at a later stage if they're ignored.
Professor, I was intrigued by the notion of switching from an advocacy to a query role when you're fatigued in a negotiation. However, I find that often asking questions when I'm tired is even more burdensome. So what do you recommend in that situation?
I still recommend focusing more on inquiry than advocacy. When you are asking questions, you know that by definition you are engaging the other party in waiting for a response. If I am merely advocating, I am simply pummeling the other side with a series of demands and expectations of concessions, and assuming that these people may be as tired as we are. They may just be dismissive, and we may not get a conversation going. So at a minimum, inquiry keeps us engaged. It's a way to keep the mind going, and it's a way to extract additional information from other parties, and it's a very important way to buy some additional time around new proposals slowly making their way to the table. So I think that it is worth the effort of keeping one engaged and hopefully eliciting some good dialogue and maybe even indeed some surprise concessions from the other side.
When I know that negotiators' fatigue has set in amongst the parties at the table, is there a way that perhaps I could leverage artificial deadlines to my advantage?
Yes, I don't know if I would call them artificial deadlines, but I would certainly bring some additional focus and reality testing to bear with our counterparts at the table. So I would suggest to fatigued negotiators that if you are in favor of wrapping this up in the next period of time, that we begin to make some serious concessions on their side. And that if they want to exit this negotiation, there will be a price for doing so, but to the extent that they have been less than cooperative as we have moved through this negotiation, a way to cut it short, say by a couple hours, is to make some necessary concessions to finish the job and get to an agreement. So you present them with a stark choice. We can remain fatigued, continue at a level of impasse here and make no progress, or they can make the necessary concessions and bring us to a fruitful conclusion. So the answer to your question is yes, there are good ways to use deadlines to bring the process to closure in a way that gets you the outcome you want and helps the other parties overcome their fatigue. And so I think this whole idea of negotiator fatigue is important for two reasons. First, to be aware that it is a phenomena that exists in complex multi-party negotiations, and that reflection should trigger in us a number of important counter-fatigue strategies to stay in the game, to play the whole game, to pay attention to the smallest details, and to use deadlines to bring parties as quickly as possible to an agreement that's in our interest and at least satisfy some of their interests without unnecessarily prolonging the process.